The silence seemed to have weight on that morning forgotten by the world. The half-open doors creaked lightly under the touch of the wind, as if they were sighing a goodbye. The shelter, which had once been a refuge for so many broken dreams, was now just shadow and echo. The cages were empty one by one, like empty chairs after a party that no one wanted to end. The floor bore paw prints and memories that could not be erased. Only one dog remained. Thin, with matted fur and old brown eyes, he stood there, motionless in front of the old security camera. His tired body suggested giving up, but his gaze was a stubborn flame. There was a strange solemnity in the way he held the camera, as if he could bridge the invisible distance between his solitude and a destiny yet to be written. There was no fear in his eyes, not even sadness. There was a wise patience, as if he knew that somehow his moment was not yet over. Time seemed to hold its breath. In that suspended moment, while the world outside continued to spin without knowing, something was preparing to happen. Something as silent and inevitable as the dawn of a new day. Sometimes it's in the last glance that a whole story begins. Helena lived in a house that seemed to have stopped in time. The walls held ancient whispers, and the faint scent of dried flowers hung in the air, like a lingering memory. She walked around the room unhurriedly, as if crossing a minefield of memories. Her fingers, thin and delicate, glided over the furniture, stopping in front of a forgotten photo album on the table. She flipped through the pages slowly. Each image was a small, silent explosion inside her. The smile of a golden-haired boy running in the sun, carefree hugs on summer days, laughter that now only existed on the yellowed paper. Helena touched her son's face in the photo with her fingertips. It was like trying to hold water between her hands. Impossible. Her heart, though still beating, seemed to carry the weight of something that would never be whole again. Since the day of the accident, she had become an expert in silence. She had learned to listen to the clock ticking in the early hours of the morning, the discreet creaking of the floor beneath her feet, the held breath when tears threatened to escape. Loneliness was his only faithful companion. And that morning, while the world outside bustled in its usual haste, Helena felt out of place, as if she lived in a parallel time, where colors were duller and sounds were muffled. It was as if she had forgotten how to live again. But somewhere unseen, a story was waiting to cross her path. And nothing would be stronger than the first thread of hope that would begin to weave. The shelter, which had once been a noisy haven of scurrying paws and hopeful barks, now felt like a sunken ship in the middle of the city. The peeling walls and the smell of wet wood testified to the weariness of the years, the exhaustion of dreams deposited there. Only Marta, the director, remained, walking through the empty corridors with steps that dragged not only her body but also the silent guilt of someone who tried until the end. She closed the cages one by one, as if sealing small, unfinished stories. Among the papers piled up on the table was the definitive order. The shelter would be demolished in 2 days. The lack of resources, the growing lack of interest from the people, the weight of bureaucracy. Everything had come together to close that chapter. And there was still Sun. That was what Marta called the last remaining dog. Not because of his appearance, but because time and neglect had erased any shine in his fur. But because of what she saw in his eyes. A tiny, insistent light, like the sun breaking through a storm. Sul remained sitting in the same place, staring at the door, as if he was still waiting for someone. As if he knew his story was not over, Marta knelt before him, tenderly running her hand over his head. Her eyes filled with tears that she did not allow to fall. "You still believe, don't you?" he murmured. And in that forgotten shelter, where hope seemed to be the last visitor, Sul remained there, waiting. As if by some quiet miracle, the world could still be touched by one last chance. In that silent dawn, Helena was alone in her house again. The blue light from the computer was the only light that illuminated her tired face. She ran her fingers through old photos, reliving a past that refused to disappear. But suddenly the screen in front of her displayed something unexpected. One photo, one simple post, one last attempt. Last chance. He's still waiting. The image showed Sul, the shelter's lonely dog, with his eyes fixed on the lens, his body slightly leaning forward as if he were waiting for something or someone. His gaze seemed to go straight through the screen, straight to Helena's heart. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She no longer believed in many things, but that look had something familiar, something essential. Something that made her feel that at that moment the universe was inviting her to a wordless reunion. Helena couldn't explain why, but a silent force drove her to respond. In a sigh, she typed, "I will." It was a simple gesture, a promise she didn't fully understand but knew she couldn't break. What drove her to make that decision was something deeper than logic, a sense that the love she had lost, the love she felt unable to give again, was still waiting for her somewhere. And maybe, just maybe, Sul was the key to getting it back. Helena's heart, which had been dormant for so long, beat differently on that cold morning. She didn't know it, but fate had somehow already begun to pull her into that new chapter. Helena drove slowly through the city streets, the car's headlights illuminating the rain marks on the sidewalk. The sound of the engine, low and constant, seemed like a compass that accompanied her on the silent journey to a place she didn't know what it represented. The city seemed to be suspended in a state of waiting, as if it too knew that something was about to change. When she arrived at the shelter, the scene before her eyes was not what she had imagined. The old building with its peeling walls gave off a smell of abandonment. Helena took a deep breath before getting out of the car, feeling a slight tension in her chest. She didn't know exactly what motivated her there, but something was pulling her. Inside the shelter, the silence seemed even heavier. The sound of footsteps echoed through the empty hallway. Marta had her back turned, organizing some things on a table near the entrance. Hearing Helena's footsteps, she turned slowly, her tired gaze softening as she recognized the woman. "You came," Marta said with a slight surprise in her voice, as if, for the first time in a long time, something was going to happen. Helena just nodded, unable to say anything else. Her eyes, however, soon found Sul. He was there, just as Marta had told him, in the same place he always was. Sul was lying down, but as soon as his eyes met Helena's, he slowly stood up, as if the simple gesture of getting up was an act of recognition. What happened next was almost imperceptible. Sul took a step towards Helena. Not just any step, but a calm, determined step, as if he knew that this would be the moment when something would change. Helena stood still. She didn't know what to feel, but something in Sul's gaze, that gaze so deep, so full of patience, touched something inside her that had remained closed for so long. It wasn't pain, nor was it longing. It was something simpler. Something that slid gently into the depths of her soul, like a cool breeze coming through an open window after a long, stuffy night. Sul moved a little closer until finally their noses met Helena's hands. The touch was soft, almost imperceptible, but there in that brief contact, something intertwined. Helena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the softness of Sul's fur, and then a warm, comforting wave took over her heart. She felt at that moment that perhaps she was ready to feel again, that perhaps it was still possible to believe in something again, something that was simple, pure, like the love that only animals know how to offer. "You will wait for me, won't you?" Helena murmured as if she were talking to herself. But Sul, As if he understood perfectly, just looked at her once more with that silent gaze full of patience and trust. He had waited for so long, but there was no rush. He knew that, in the right moment, she would believe it too. Helena's house was no longer as quiet as before. The footsteps, which had previously sounded hollow through the rooms, were now accompanied by a steady but gentle rhythm of paws that touched the floor with quiet confidence. Sewell had found his place there, and although the change was subtle, it was undeniable. In the early days, Helena still didn't know exactly how to deal with her new companion. Sewell, on the other hand, seemed to understand more than any human being could. He didn't force his presence, but his patience was endless. He was there by her side, silently observing her. It was as if he knew that he couldn't rush Helena's healing. He just had to be there for her when she was ready. She began to notice the small changes within herself. In the mornings when she woke up, instead of getting lost in her own heavy thoughts, she found herself laughing at the way Sewell would stretch out beside her, eyes closed and making a small moan, as if apologizing for her own joy. It was a light laugh, something she thought she had forgotten what it felt like. The smell of coffee, which had previously gone unnoticed, now welcomed her with more affection, bringing a new warmth to the mornings. Sewell sat beside him, his gaze fixed intently on the coffee cup as if waiting for a gesture. A simple gesture, a caress, a gentle word. The warmth of Helena's hand on Sewell's fur seemed to make the world around them slow down, as if they were both out of time in that safe space. However, there were times when the old pain would manifest itself. On the hardest days, Helena would feel an emptiness invade her chest, something she already knew by heart. The grief would not go away, and the longing would come heavy like a dark cloud covering the sky. She could not help it, and sometimes she would retreat to the corner of the sofa, lost in thought. Sewell, however, was always there, sitting beside her, offering her his silent presence. He didn't try to fill the void. There were no promises of a quick cure, but he was there to share the space, to simply be present, without expectations. It was in the moments when Helena tried to push him away that he was closest. Sewell would slowly approach with his warm, soft body and lie down at her feet. His gaze, immense and deep, penetrated the defenses she had built up over the years. When she looked at him, a simple gesture, a slight movement of his tail, or the way he looked at her, seemed to break down an invisible barrier inside her heart. Sewell didn't demand answers. He wasn't there to heal, but to remind her of one simple thing. Love doesn't need explanations. Helena felt the pain, but she also felt the weight of her silent transformation. It wasn't an instantaneous change, nor was it magical. It was the subtlety of healing, the gradual return of a confidence she had lost. The days were calmer, the nights less lonely. She began to realize that, contrary to what she imagined, Sewell was not a remedy for pain, but a silent mirror that helped her look at herself without rushing to change, without forcing. On certain days, however, Sewell's presence seemed to be a poignant reminder of all that she had lost. One cloudy afternoon, Helena found herself lost again, sitting on the garden bench, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. A piece of an old memory invaded her, and longing took hold of her with an intensity that almost crushed her. She wanted to scream. She wanted to fight against that deep emptiness that still insisted on inhabiting her chest. But once again, Sewell appeared. He didn't rush forward, didn't offer advice, but sat beside her as if to say, "It doesn't have to be now. Just wait. I'm here." And in that moment, the silence didn't feel like a burden. It was a subtle promise that one day the empty space would be filled, not with what she had lost, but with what she could still find. Winter had set in. The days were shorter, and the nights were longer. Helena had already gotten used to the silent presence of the sun, which now dominated the space around her, becoming a part of her routine, of her life. She felt that something deep was happening, although she didn't know exactly what it was. Something that touched her slowly, something that slowly prepared her for something greater. It was on a particularly cold night that everything changed. Helena was preparing dinner when the sound of a soft bark made her stop. It was Sul, standing in the doorway, staring at her. His eyes were slightly wide, more attentive than usual, as if he were trying to tell her something. Without hesitation, Helena approached him, gently touching his head. He didn't pull away, his gaze fixed on hers, unfazed. And then suddenly she felt it. A slight pressure in her chest, a familiar sensation. Sul stood up and walked into the hallway, turning to her with an expression of urgency. Helena's heart raced. Something was wrong. She hurriedly followed him into the garden, where Sul stood at the fence, staring at something invisible in the distance. The cold wind bit at her skin, but the feeling inside her was different now. No longer the emptiness of grief, no longer the stifled longing, but a strange sense of alertness. Something was about to happen. Suddenly she heard the sound of a car approaching. It was no ordinary sound, but a sound of frenzy. Frenzied, almost desperate. She approached the fence, feeling a growing pressure, as if the ground itself were shaking. The car stopped abruptly in front of the house. It was an unfamiliar car, but when the door opened, a familiar hospital smell filled the chilly air. The man who came out was a paramedic, his eyes desperate. She couldn't resist. I tried, but... He trailed off, his voice trailing off as his gaze found Helena's face. It was the news that Helena had feared. Sul's life, marked by silent waiting, was somehow intertwined with his own. But that night she understood unequivocally that the pain of the past was still there, but it would no longer be her prison, because she was no longer alone. She had someone waiting for her. As the man spoke, Sul silently approached Helena, and with a firm gaze rested his head on her lap. It was the last gesture, but it was not a goodbye. It was a sacrifice, a price paid for the peace they both sought. Sul's body grew even warmer in his arms, the night air now mixed with a strange scent of tranquility. He was there for her, until the very end. His mission was accomplished. Sul had brought her back to the world, and now he was guiding her back to his heart. With every beat of Helena's heart, she knew without a shadow of a doubt that everything she had lost and everything she still felt was part of her journey. But what remained was not just the pain. What remained was the love she was beginning to understand and accept. A love that overflowed not from someone's absence, but from the simple fact that she was alive and able to love again. She looked up at the sky, and a light breeze touched her face, as if the universe itself was telling her that although the pain would never completely disappear, it had been transformed. And with Sul's gaze, she now understood that the path to healing would never be a lonely one. She had been rescued once again, but this time not by a man, nor by a grand gesture, but by a simple soul who knew more than she did about the power of silence, waiting, and patience. Winter passed and spring arrived unhurriedly. It spread through the city gently, bringing new colors to the fields and hearts. Helena, in turn, had changed, not in a visible way, but in something deeper, more intimate, something that time could not erase, something that could not be measured, but that could be felt in every breath, in every step she took. Sul was no longer there physically, but his presence remained stronger than it could ever have been. He was gone, but his mission was complete. She felt him in every corner of the house, in every beat of her own soul. Helena realized now that Sul had been the bridge to herself, the bridge to her own redemption. Over time, the void he had left was filled with a new kind of presence. Sul had shown her that the true meaning of healing was not in pushing away pain, but in embracing it, recognizing it as part of the process. Helena no longer needed to run from her feelings, no longer needed to seek explanations for the mysteries of life. She had already found the answer in the simplicity of a silent gaze and in the unwavering trust of a dog who loved her without reservation. One clear afternoon, while walking alone in the park, Helena found a wooden bench, the bench where she used to sit, alone, with her eyes lost in the horizon. But today, as she sat there, she felt a peace she had not felt before. It was not a peace of indifference, but a peace that came from understanding. A peace that came from a heart that now knew how to accept life as it is, with its pains, its losses, and its healings. The wind blew gently, carrying the dry leaves along the path, and the sun slowly set on the horizon. Helena closed her eyes, and for a moment she heard the soft sound of approaching paws. It wasn't the sun, but somehow she knew that he would always be near. He who had been her beacon, her guide, her friend, was now present in her heart. She smiled softly, the smile of someone who has been through a lot and found something much greater than simple relief from pain. She found strength in the unconditional love and peace that only animals can offer. "I understand you now, Sul," she whispered to the wind, as if it could hear, as if it were there beside her. Life moved on, but the memory of Sul, the look that never left her, the love he taught her to receive without fear, remained with her. And in her chest, the emptiness that had once been painful now became a sacred space, where the love of a canine friend became an eternal reminder that sometimes healing comes not from the absence of pain, but from the courage to continue.